Well, thank you for joining me. This is Dr. Jason W. Marston, theologist, New South Wales, Australia. And we're talking on the subject of covert emotional incest. We did our introduction in the last talk, which showed us the dynamics that work within inside the family before any outsiders come in, where the parent uses a child or children as a surrogate partner to meet the needs as far as they can, where the partner, previous partner, or father or mother, or whatever the case was, met those needs. But because they've left and the adults on their own, they no longer have an adult there to share in those needs. So now we have the adult replacing that person with a child or children. We're moving on now to the entry into this dynamic. And the entry into this dynamic is when everything starts to change. Whilst things can be going along smoothly with the usual squabbles and, for the most part, peacefulness, the emotional incest develops. The formation of the bond and the enmeshment develops. There's a tremendous fusion taking place, illegitimate fusion that takes place between the adult and child or children. And this becomes a formation in the character and the core of the relationship, where parent is allowing child to come into an adult realm, private adult realm, and the child's allowing the adult to bring adult stuff into the child realm. But what can the child do? This tells us then that primarily it's the parent's influence that is allowing this formation between the parent and child, this illegitimate formation outside the legitimacy of maternal love, to take place and form. It's very powerful. Now, be it 12 months to 5 years or whatever the case might be, this formation's taking place now. There's an illegitimate enmeshment built on things that can range from lust to spite to bitterness, all sorts of transmissions of emotions are firing, but on an illegitimate foundation that primarily stands on lust, a bent form of lust. Now, enter an outsider, because what happens is, for the most part, most adults can't last. They just can't last. Not all, but for the most part. Most adults don't want to be on their own. The child just can't fulfill the adult needs. Many women will say, well, now it's my turn. Here, the child's had their turn, now it's my turn. And this is something you need to be aware of when you come along. You've got to look at what's your reception from the child. There's always going to be an air of caution, and that's to be granted. But what's the reception initially, and what is transpiring initially between the parent and your new partner? You've got to look at the dynamic there. You've got to look at the forces working between the parent and the mother and the father, whatever the case is. You've got to look at your reception and the parent's reception of you relative to the child's influence. The parent's reception of you relative to the child's influence. Now, initially, you will have the influence, initially. But as time passes by, and we get through what's called the honeymoon stage of things, and things are now starting to get to the point where we need to shuffle and shift dynamics to keep things in order, you'll find that your influence will now be challenged, usually by the child. If it's an adult child and they have a partner, it might be by the parent to the child. But let's look at it as a child to the parent. So now the child will start to badger and probe and interfere with your influence on your partner. They'll want to have the influence over the partner. They'll start to challenge your time with that person. They'll start to challenge your co-joint decisions with that person. They'll seem to be hovering around the relationship. Interfering. Now, this is the key word. Interfering. Now, they don't mean to, because remember, they've been formed into playing a part in the adult's life. And how does an adult now just strip that away from the child? Or how does a child now strip that away from the adult? Because they've caused a formation. They've caused an enmeshment between each other. So you're watching this, you're sensing this, your head's swimming, you're going, what is happening here? You're thinking to yourself, well, this is just normal reactions to me being an outsider. But it's more than that. It's a developed form of emotional connection. It's an interdependent bond between the parent and the child that cannot now be undone. It will not be undone. You have to accept this bond will not be undone. Now, every time, listen very carefully what I'm about to say, every time I have seen an adult try to undo this bond, inevitably, it has been ferocious. Absolutely ferocious. The bond can't be challenged without severe reactions, emotional reactions. I can remember a couple coming in, a man with a woman, and it was the woman's child, 10 years old. And the school was 200 metres away from their house. The child was kicking the walls and hitting the walls of the night. He'd never done it before until the new bloke turned up. Decent sort of bloke. But what happened was, she used to drive this child to the school and drop him off and pick him up from the school. And there'd be little girls and boys walking to the school, but she would drive him just down the road to the school and then pick him up from the school and bring him back. And it was religious how she did it, on a religious basis. Didn't miss a beat. Never missed a beat. Well, the suggestion came up that wouldn't it be time for him to start to walk to school? This was just a suggestion. This is, remember, the formation is that you will drive me to school. Why should that formation change, all of a sudden change now? And where is the influence for that change coming from? It couldn't be you, Mum. It must be somebody else. Therefore, there's an immediate rejection of the idea. Now, this is how far it can go. A 10-year-old child Well, apparently the report was he did walk with his mother to school on the first day, but she did pick him up. On the second day, the fellow went to work and he forgot something, and on his way back through, called in to quickly grab whatever it was that he was going to pick up, and he could hear this yelling and screaming. Horrible yelling and screaming, and he didn't think it was even coming from the house, from their house. He thought it was coming from next door or something. Well, he walked through the door, and the 10-year-old child had his mother by the throat against the wall, demanding that she drive him to school. Now, when this man came through the door, the child was startled, caught in the act, ran down into his room, and the mother followed, both in a panic. How did a normal, well-behaved, stable, 10-year-old child get to the point where he was kicking and punching the walls and it deteriorated to the point where he had his mother against the wall by the throat? This is the other side of covert emotional incest. This is the other side of it. Because of the formation and the stubbornness and the weldedness, the unshakableness of that formation, they'll fight not to let it break. And this was a manifestation of that. This isn't in alignment with how we are. This is the part that people don't see, what's going on behind the scenes, where's the other side of it, where you've got the consequential side of these emotional bonds, which are fierce. A 10-year-old child with his mother against the wall. And she wasn't a small woman. How did she submit to that? How did she not stop that child from holding her against the wall? What happened to that woman at that point? This is where the spiritual side of the bonds lock these people up under the authority. Now, the child had the authority, remember, and she submitted to that authority, and the submission of that was, I will be held by the throat against the wall until I obey what he is telling me to do, which is to drive him to school. This is the other side of the covert emotional incest. This is the dark side. This is the side that you don't normally get to see. And here it is not reported. There are adverse reactions to this. Terrible adverse reactions to covert emotional incest. It's not all dandy, I can assure you, at all. It's vicious and fierce, and people get hurt. Now, the way in which this disintegrated to that point was the presence of the new partner inside the dynamic, inside the area of the covert emotional incest. It will not bend or bow to any influence outside itself. This is how strong and wicked and evil these soul ties are. And people get hurt. Physically hurt. It manifests physically. I said to you, covert emotional incest whilst it's in the unseen realm of the emotions and everything, will manifest physically, and it has to be recognised for what it is. It's much bigger and greater than we realise. It's a more serious community problem, and probably global problem, than we realise. It's no good isolating it just to one or two or whatever. This is a prolific problem in communities. It's coming out of the single parent families. The shift of the authority between the child and the parent to satiate the communication in the emotional realm of who wants to be boss at that time. You understand the graphic transitions of power that are going on here. And when you're a bystander watching this, and you know what it is, it can be very disturbing, to say the least. I know men and women that have had to leave relationships because the ferocity of these bonds becomes so fierce. The conflict between the adult and the child became so fierce because there was somebody else now. Covert emotional incest will not triangulate. It will not triangulate. It will not. It just won't. Somebody is going to get hurt. And usually it's either going to be the parent that has the partner. The child will just deteriorate to the point where it's physically attacking. It's gone from quiet, passive abuse to verbal abuse, then to verbal and physical abuse. This is how far this thing can go. This is how dark this is. This is the other side. This is the deep recess of covert emotional incest that not many people talk about. You see the tantrums. You'll see the quietness, the passive-aggressive quietness. You'll see the rage. You'll see the intrusion of the child's authority over the parent while the parent's trying to develop a relationship with its new partner. The child will intrude. It's been given permission to intrude through the formation of the covert emotional incest relationship before the partner come along. It can intrude. It thinks it can intrude. How can a parent stop that without fierce opposition? When the partner leaves, the parent gets badgered and harassed and incredible, fierce enmity, because covert emotional incest will not, under any circumstances, triangulate. It'll appear to, it might agree to, but that's only superficial. That's lies. It will never, ever, ever, in its proper form, share itself with anybody else. And I've known women that have been married to men, and they've been mummy's boys, mummy's 70 or whatever, and she's still got control of that man, and these women have lived miserable marriages. Now, because there's conflicts between the parent and the child, now as the parent's badgering the child who's now married, the child has to submit to the parent, and then, of course, who gets badgered? Who is going to be on the end of this now? The new partner. Because it all goes round in a circle. You'll think your partner's bending towards you. You'll think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And just as you're starting to think that everything's okay, it turns on you. The next thing, you're in the middle of this fierce battle where the influence of the has come in and it's attacking the relationship. And what will happen is, this is what will happen. For the peace sake of it, the parent will side with the child, or the child will side with the parent, and it might just be for a glimpse. You will get a glimpse of it. And you will be separated from any legitimacy that should have come out of whatever the matter was. And the emotional covert, the covert emotional incestual relationship will win every time. You'll think that you're getting on top, and then all of a sudden it will come out at you like a bear charging out of the forest. And you'll be left sitting there or standing there wondering what just happened.
Well, thank you for joining me.
It's humiliating, demoralising, and I would not wish it on anyone. And people don't recognise it and think it's okay, and they'll stay in it for years and years. I know women that have got to 50, 60 and their husband's still running after their mother. And they've robbed that woman of love and affection that she should have had, but never got. Very, very wicked and evil bond. Well, that's the second talk in my series of lectures on covert emotional incest, and we'll continue this subject in the next talk. Thank you for joining me, and bye for now.